Hey guys, Triple T Cat here recording for the Zombie Arcade, and this is going to be a little bit different from most of my other Kerbal Space Program videos, because in this video, I'm actually going to talk about how to accomplish things in the game without crashing and exploding. I know that's weird, but it's what I'm going to do. And in this video, I'm just going to cover some really basic stuff. Basically, how to get a craft into a stable orbit, or one way of doing that, and what you should probably be doing if you want to be visiting other planets with that craft. I'm just going to do, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this craft, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the design here, I'm going to put it into a stable orbit, and then I'm going to do a flyby of the moon, and I'm going to talk you guys through that process. This is actually one of my older designs. This is not a particularly good rocket design. In fact, the reason I'm showing you an older design is that I think a lot of the fun in this game is in, most of the fun really is in coming up with your rocket design yourself and figuring out what works, what doesn't work, that kind of thing is where a lot of the fun is. And so I kind of want to leave it to you guys to discover far better designs rather than showing you one that I think is actually pretty good. I'm going to show you an old design, but using this design, you'll be able to do moon flybys, that kind of stuff. You can completely escape Kerbin if you wish to and get it in an orbit around the sun itself. In fact, I've got one craft using this design in an orbit around the sun right now. So the design itself is pretty simple. I've basically got three sort of sections here. The most obvious one is I've got these big boosters here. These are the solid fuel boosters. These are the RockMax back solid fuel boosters. You can see I've got four of those connected with these little small decouplers. The central rocket is a couple of fuel tanks, and I've got one of these LVT T-30s on the end of that. And that sort of whole boosting apparatus can separate here. There's a decoupler there, and it's this top part with I've got a probe command thing here, where actually the solar panels snap off if I deploy all of them at once. As I said, this design has a lot of pretty bad problems. I've got a probe here attached, and it's got its own little sort of fuel boosters, that kind of stuff, so I can fly around. So that's this design. This is fairly straightforward, as I said, and as I said as well, this is not a particularly good design, but it is an example of a design that you could make that will get you off the planet for as long as you could desire. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and launch this sucker. So the first thing we're going to do is engage our SAS so we don't flip the fuck out and blast into space. Should probably go without saying. And we're kind of just going to go up for a while. While we're doing that, I'm going to slowly turn myself to the right here with the E key and just get myself so that I'm facing Zisvay. The reason I'm doing that is that I want to put myself in an orbit that's along the sort of east-west axis of the planet, or it's going to be harder to get to other bodies in the solar system a little bit. The reason for that will become more obvious in a moment. And basically I'm just going to keep boosting here until these solid fuel boosters run out. And what we want to do here is get our height to about 10,000 meters, and then start tilting the nose of our craft downwards. I'm just going to jettison those, they're gone now. Start the next engine, of course. Start tilting the nose of our craft downwards to about 45 degrees here, relative to the horizon. Looking at the nav ball here for your piloting, guys, if you aren't already aware, that's what we want to be doing. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up the map, get my nav ball open here, and we're going to keep thrusting until our apoapsis, until the height we're going to reach here is about 80,000 meters. You technically only need to get to about 70,000 for a stable orbit, but we're going to go a little bit higher just so we have some leeway here to work with. And that's important because if it's below 70,000 meters, 70 kilometers, you're going to hit the atmosphere while you're orbiting, and your orbit's going to decay, and you will eventually crash back into the planet. So you want this to be around about 80k is going to be just fine. And we are now just going to sit here and wait for a little while until we get up close to this apoapsis. slow time back down to 1 times, about 10 seconds away. And what we're going to do is we're going to thrust with, we're only using 2/3 throttle now, not full throttle. And what I'm going to try and do is keep my heading, which is the little sort of yellow circle with the thing sticking off it. We're going to try and keep that right around, sort of at the horizon, so we're not falling much below our apoapsis there, by directing our thrust a little bit above, because the gravity of the planet is, of course, pulling us back down at this point. And while we're doing that, we're going to go back into map mode here, and we're just going to watch the ring of our trajectory expand. It is a little bit unfortunate that on this map screen you can't actually see how much... there you go. There you go. You can see how much fuel you have remaining if you open up the resources tab there, but I am in the bad habit, perhaps, of just, you know, going back out of the map screen to check that out. You can see this booster is going to run out of fuel shortly, but that's fine. We do have more engines. As I said, this is not a particularly amazing design, but it's one that works for me. Well, it's one that worked for me. I do use somewhat more efficient things now. Alright. And this can, you know, this can be a little bit sloppy, but ideally what we want to do here is we just want to push out our orbit until we get this periapsis showing up on the side of the planet. And we're just going to keep going until that periapsis is above 70,000, around 80,000. This is not a particularly round orbit. If you were so inclined, you could make this orbit rounder by going out to the apoapsis here, thrusting just briefly, and you'll push out the periapsis, and you can get a much rounder orbit. But for our purposes, we don't need to. So the orbit I've put myself in here will never decay. This object will just keep orbiting the planet for pretty much all time now, because it's never going to strike the atmosphere and decelerate. But that's not particularly interesting. It is the first step to more interesting things. What we are going to try to do next is just fly past the moon. You can see I have actually landed something on the moon before. That's a little bit more complicated. I'll probably look at that in another video, but for now we're just going to go and visit the moon. So in order to do that, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to click on our trajectory somewhere and click Add Maneuver, and then click on this little green circle thing and drag that out, and that's going to be a prograde burn. So we're burning our engines, accelerating ourselves in the direction we're already going. And I happened to aim quite well, but normally you might not. So let's say you just dragged it out of the periapsis, which would be the most efficient thing, generally speaking. And in this case would happen to also work. But let's say, for instance, that you just drag this out and you're not, and you'll get like an arc like this. You'll see this is a big orbit here, and what you can then do is you can just play around with this. There's a way to predict what you're going to need to do, like when you're going to need to thrust to actually meet the moon, but don't worry about that early on. Just drag out a big old dumb line like this until it's pretty much at where the orbit of the moon is, and then you can just kind of drag this around until something like this happens, where you will actually encounter the moon's gravity, which basically means, yeah, you can, if you wish, start orbiting the moon if you're going to have this kind of moon encounter. So we've set up ourselves with this maneuver that will result in us encountering the moon, and we can see our projected trajectory here. And you can see the node is in 27 minutes. So what we're going to do is go back into our little view here and maneuver it so that the nose of our craft is pointing in the direction we're going to want to go, which is indicated by this blue triangular thing. And then we're just going to accelerate time for about 27 minutes. And you want to make sure, this is important, when you're actually doing this burn, make sure you're in the map view. Don't just go off this little gauge here, this estimated burn time, because that will not necessarily get your trajectory where you want it. So we're going to accelerate time just a little bit more here until we're much right on top of this node. Alright. And we're going to just use 2/3 throttle again. We don't need to use full thrust, at least not on this craft, in order to actually... We're still going to be able to change our velocity pretty quickly because it's a very light ship. And we won't use up as much fuel this way. So this will give you a rough guide of how long you're going to need to burn for and how much you're going to need to ultimately change your velocity by. And make sure you keep making course adjustments here to keep yourself on target. But the reason we're in map screen here is we want to keep an eye on what our actual projected trajectory is, because these predictions may not get us to exactly the route we had set for ourselves. And we don't need to be exactly. Thankfully, we don't need to be 100% exact on this route. However, we want to be quite close, hopefully, which is why we're watching this blue line, and we're basically going to see when this blue line is pretty much matching up with where the yellow line is, or at least when we're getting a moon encounter of some kind. We're going to stop thrusting with the X key. Sorry, a little bit more so it looks a little bit nicer. Alright, that's going to be fine. That's not exactly, it's not as ideal as what we had projected, but that's going to be fine. So you can see here we're going to encounter the moon in about 9 hours, and we'll escape the moon a little bit more than an hour and a half after that. During this part, there's not a whole lot you have to do, except for one very important thing. If you're using an unmanned craft like this, and you are using the kind of solar panel that needs to be extended, do make sure you extend your solar panels. The number of times I've put one of these things up with these solar panels shoved on here, and forgotten to extend the panels at any point, then you just can't control the craft anymore. It's really not ideal, and I'm going to extend all of these at once, which will probably result in them snapping off at some point when they're rotating because they collide with each other, but that's not important right now. That doesn't even matter. It looks quite nice, though, while it's not all colliding with itself and exploding. Anyway, what we're going to do now is accelerate time a little bit. Alright, so we are now in the moon's sphere of influence, under the effect of its gravity, and if we wanted to, what we would now do is basically face retrograde, so on the nav ball, this little circle with the cross through it, and we would burn our thrusters until this blue line here made a nice circle around the moon. And then we would be in orbit of the moon instead of Kerbin. We would never return to Kerbin, and that would be lovely. However, we're not going to worry about that today, and I'm actually just going to allow this craft to return to the planet. Anyway, that's sort of a basic, very, very basic introductory guide to some of the stuff you can do in Kerbal Space Program. I showed you a little bit of a design in the beginning of the video. Pretty crappy rocket design, but a rocket design that will work to get you off the planet. I showed you guys one way to put yourself in a nice stable orbit, and once you're in that good stable orbit, what you have to actually do to get to a different planet, for example. It's a little bit more complicated if you're going further than the moon, outside Kerbin's sphere of influence, so if you wanted to go to, say, Mars, Duna or Eve here, it is a little bit more complicated, but the same basic theory is the same. You put yourself into a stable orbit, and then you use the gravity of Kerbin to help you accelerate towards whatever it is that you want to go to. In this case, merely the moon. Now you guys know the first things I learned in Kerbal Space Program. And as I learn more things, I may make more videos showing them. If you guys like this video, let me know in the comments, leave a like or something, and I'll be more likely to make more Kerbal Space Program videos in the future. Until next time, thanks for watching. Trouble T Cat out.